we'll send out the information soon about I think it's the February 25th, is that right, the sitting? Did I
Yeah, I
get that
think-
right?
I think
Uh, It's an open sky, half-day sitting and, community meeting, Sangha meeting in the afternoon. There is an open space in the Aravipa Sesshin, outside of Tucson. So if you're interested, be in touch with Mary Koopman. And the Everyday Zen Sesshin is coming up. The information isn't out yet, but it will be very soon. And that's at Santa Sabina in Marin County. So we continue on with the Buddha's words. So these are some reflections that I was having while I was sitting. See, those of you who aren't here, you don't get to experience basketball across the way, which is actually, I used to play varsity basketball. I thought, that doesn't look the way it was when I did it. Is the coach has dreads coming down his back and he's got a braided beard and. Pardon?
Coaches, yeah.
Yeah,
Very different.
it's totally cool. So you have, and then I thought. Buddhism Zen is a contact sport. It's a contact sport. I would guess most probably Zen teachers or whatever it is that I am wouldn't say that. Like someone said recently that they were calling a retreat something about wild, this, and this, and someone said, Zen isn't wild? Wild? And I thought, oh. It's like, this is an embodied contact sport with life. We just look like we're just sitting here doing nothing. But it's dynamic and engaged. And it's also why some of you need to come down here and be here. Sorry, but you need to be here instead of there. And I'm really glad you're there. And I'm really glad wherever you are. But this is an embodied sport. And even those of you who are online because you're distant, long distance, we are in direct contact. And periodically you'll show up. I'm looking at Amy like at the Tassajara Sangha week and yeah, making faces. And so that arose out of this chapter. I sort of hadn't reflected on it until I was getting ready to say something. This chapter is called One's Own Good and for the Good of Others. And the Buddha, I thought, translated this. Did the Buddha really say this? And then I thought Bhikkhu Bodhi translated this. And I think Bhikkhu Bodhi is a pretty reliable translator. And he's saying that the Buddha said things like people are fools or they're wise. And he called people good or bad. I mean, he really he used contactful words. We're much more polite.
Yeah.
Which is why after I tell you something about what the Buddha said, I want to move into Zenji Earthling Manuel, who is, I mean, if anybody knows about what it is as a person of color and a person of who's queer and has found her way in this tradition, I'm sure she's suffered fools and cultivated a deep wisdom in the contact sport of being in a human body. And she doesn't shy away. Very contactful. But let me start with the Buddha. So Bhikkhu Bodhi says in part 6, where we are, we move beyond binary friendships. Last week we talked about the importance of spiritual friendships To see how the scriptures of early Buddhism treat the relationship between the individual and those that come into his or her sphere of influence. Since the Buddha was primarily addressing monastics, maybe that's why he could call people fools and wise. You could get away with it maybe more in a monastery, I don't know. The text prioritized monastic concerns, but even these have wider implications. So let me read you a little bit. These are selections that Bhikkhu Bodhi brought forward. The fool and the wise person. These are the Buddha's words, as best we know. Monks. One who possesses three qualities should be known as a fool. Contact. What three? Bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct. One who possesses these three qualities should be known as a fool. One who possesses three qualities should be known as a wise person. What three? Bodily good conduct, verbal good conduct, and mental good conduct. One who possesses these three qualities should be known as a wise person. Goes on for a bit, and therefore, monks, you should train yourselves thus. We will avoid the three qualities that makes one known as a fool, and we will undertake and practice the three qualities that make one known as a wise person. It is in this way that you should train yourselves: body, speech, and mind. Body, speech, and mind. Then he goes on to say, as if he hasn't like kind of stirred things up enough, starts talking about bad persons and good persons. Monks, a bad person is possessed of bad qualities. Maybe it's kind of helpful. I mean, we don't have to call ourselves bad or somebody else bad, but maybe it's just really helpful to look at and consider. A person possessed of bad qualities associates with a bad person. He decides as a bad person, and he counsels as a bad person. He speaks as a bad person. He acts as a bad person. He holds views as a bad person, and he gives gifts as a bad person. Okay, trying to get out of that one. And how is a bad person possessed of bad qualities? Here, a bad person has no faith, no shame, no fear of wrongdoing. She is unlearned, lazy, forgetful, and unwise. That is how a bad person is possessed of bad qualities. But just pay attention. With loving kindness, pay attention. What is it to those moments where you have no faith? Maybe cynicism arises. No shame, no fear of wrongdoing. Lazy, what's that? Forgetful and unwise. Want to hear about a good person? Okay, you ready? Taking notes? Monks, a good person is possessed of good qualities. She associates with good people. Looks like we're doing okay so far. Decides as a good person and counsels as a good person. This person speaks as a good person, acts as a good person, and holds views as a good person, and gives gifts as a good person. And how is a good person possessed of good qualities? Here, a good person has faith. What is faith? That's an interesting conversation. Shame. What is shame that isn't casting a pall on yourself or other people? But what is it to have regret and remorse? It's really important. You have a fear of wrongdoing. I don't want to do harm, and I don't want to harm people. This person is learned, energetic, mindful, and wise. It actually kind of sounds like the Paramitas. That is how a good person is possessed of good qualities. You have good friends who have faith, shame, fear of wrongdoing, who are learned, energetic, mindful, and wise. You decide as a good person. You do not decide for your own affliction, for the affliction of others, and for the affliction of both. You don't want to cause harm. How do you counsel a good person? You do not counsel people for their own affliction, for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both. It's like you wouldn't say to somebody, oh, go ahead, you can get away with it. I mean, in big or small ways. We all do this all the time, right? Don't you sort of think you can get away with stuff? I mean, I do.
Yeah.
Not as big or bad as maybe, I mean, I was never that bad, but I have a quality of wanting to push the edge. What is that? I mean, I think that's a good quality, and I also think, what is that? Pay attention there. A good person abstains from false speech, from divisive speech, from harsh speech, and from idle speech. Pay attention to your speech. How do you act as a good person? You abstain from the destruction of life. First precept, first clear mind precept. You abstain from taking what is not given. Second clear mind precept. And from sexual misconduct. Third clear mind precepts. We have in our tradition 16 precepts. The earlier tradition, the Pali traditions, have 5, like Thich Nhat Hanh has 5 precepts. And those would be the first 3. We're going to go back to this today. How do you give gifts as a good person? You give a gift carefully. You give it with your own hand. You give it showing respect. You give a valuable gift and gives it with the view that something will come of it. That is how you give gifts as a good person. That good person, thus possessed of good qualities, who thus associates as a good person, decides as a good person, counsels as a good person, speaks as a good person, acts as a good person, holds views as a good person, and gives gifts as a good person. And then goes on to say, essentially, what's the root of all this? Which is the root of the teachings, which is greed, hate, and delusion. If you really pay attention, greed, hate, and delusion is a Brahman overcome by greed intends for his own affliction. You just want it for yourself. For the affliction of others, affliction, you don't want the other person to have it, and for the affliction of both. And then you experience mental suffering and dejection. But you can abandon this. You can study greed. I want it, I want it. Me. Not judgment. I'm not trying to shame anybody. Just pay attention. A Brahman, greed, hate, and delusion. So here's hate. A Brahman, when overcome by hate, intends for his own affliction, for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both. And then you experience, mental suffering and dejection. But when you abandon it, you don't intend for the affliction of yourself or anybody else. And one overcome by delusion intends for one's own affliction, for the affliction of others, for the affliction of both. And again, you experience mental suffering and dejection. When delusion is abandoned, you do not intend for affliction to anyone, and then you don't suffer mental suffering or dejection. So let's hear how Zenju might say this in current era time, which is, of course, then how would you say this in current era time? Here's a little article called The Sage Wisdom of the Ancients, Zen Guidance and Precepts for Living in Contemporary Times. The teachings of the Buddha came from the earth he sat upon. Contact sport, sat on the earth. It is ancient wisdom that existed even before the Buddha was born. This writing is reclaiming and reintroducing the age-old wisdom of the Buddha's precepts for living in today's world. So we're just reclaiming with her what the Buddha said in his time in a way that obviously connected with people because they thought he was a great sage. What is your motivation for what you do in the world, and what wisdom underlies your actions? We are taught to live with what are called precepts or vows. You can think of precepts as sage wisdom from grandparents or wise elders who have awakened to the nature of life. We just call them precepts. Other people call them this or that. In many cultures, especially Native American, Asian, and African, there are ancient folk tales which demonstrate lessons on ways to live in harmony. There are many Buddhist tales as well. And the precepts handed down to us, which is essentially what the Buddha was saying, is similar to the lessons in these folk tales. They are meant to assist us in valuing life, not to judge self or each other from a righteous place. Does that sound similar? They are not principles to measure one's flaws or to measure one's level of spirituality. There is no external punishment for breaking the precepts. Mostly the precepts are how an awakened person lives, which is to be mindful of the suffering caused by your own actions. In this way of caring for each other, we nurture a spiritually based social justice. The precepts give you an idea of how to attend to life and to the life of others. We cultivate, create, and sustain life. We give generously. We have sexual relationships that are respectful of the body as life, a living creation. We offer caring words. We offer timely silence. We stay aware and awake of how we are relating to life. I think it's the exact same thing the Buddha was saying. It's just her words now in this time. Many of us are afraid. When paralyzed by fear, we cannot value life. Fear takes us away from being aware of anything other than fear. Study fear. Fear takes away a sense of heart, tenderness, and vulnerability. What are we afraid of? What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? It's not an idle question. I have thought that I was afraid of other people not being aware of the suffering they cause. I have been afraid of pain that may be afflicted because of other people's unconsciousness and disregard, their disconnection and ignorance. But by being afraid of their ignorance, I suffer and then become as disconnected and ignorant of our interrelationship. I cannot follow the precepts without understanding that others are also afraid. And in our fear, we lose the capacity to value each other. We lose the chance to transmit light in the world. And then she quotes Kobun Chino, who's in our lineage, who says, the main subject is how to become a transmitter of actual light, life light. Practice takes place to shape your whole ability to reflect. Practice takes place to shape your whole ability to reflect the light coming through you and to generate, to regenerate your system so the light increases its power. That might be a good person or a wise person. That's our job. Each precept is a remark about hard climbing, maybe climbing down. You don't use the precepts for accomplishing your own personality or fulfilling your dream of your highest image. You don't use the precepts in that way. The The precepts are the reflected light world of one precept, which is Buddha's mind itself, which is the presence of Buddha. And then she talks about taking refuge. So I wanted to just say a little bit about taking refuge, which is the beginning of the precepts and which is the 10th precept. It's the very end, so it's this continuous circle. The three treasures are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are not owned by Buddhism. They are Sanskrit words that were used in ancient times to describe spiritual communities. What do you mean by taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? In order to give full devotion to ending suffering, there is taking refuge. Taking refuge means giving full devotion of your life to the Buddha way, which includes the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Taking refuge does not mean that you run away from the world into the meditation hall or to sit quietly in your bedroom when times are hard. It doesn't mean to stay away from certain kinds of people or places. We are not taking refuge in Buddha, the human being, but rather devotion to the essence of the being, which is the essence of awakening. You awaken to what is teaching you about life. What is teaching you about life? Buddha clearly saw the nature of things. He did not see with his eyes. He did not use his feet to find the path. He did not formulate an intellectual awareness while probing the mysteries of life. He simply allowed himself to be a vehicle by which unadulterated wisdom poured forth. So to take refuge in Buddha is to take refuge in being a good person and waking up to our own wisdom. Katagiri Roshi said, taking refuge in Dharma is good medicine, our interrelatedness. We come together in acknowledgement of our interrelatedness with all beings. It's a path of life. And at the same time, we are taking in all of life as teachings, secular and sacred, difficult and easy. For our own good and for the good of everyone else. And finally, taking refuge in Sangha, embracing spiritual friendship and the community of those who have devoted themselves to the teachings of the Buddha. That's what a good, wise person does. You find good, wise friends. In Sangha, everyone has come together with an expressed willingness to deal with their suffering and its impact on others. We expect the ground beneath the Sangha to be stable and strong. when in truth we are together in the confusion and challenges of living awake. Let me do that again. There is an expectation that all will be good in the Neverland of meditation. We expect the ground beneath the Sangha to be stable and strong, when in truth, we are together in the confusion and challenge of living awake. Full contact sport, no promises. And in Sangha, you are reminded that you are not alone in the journey. Our Sangha friends are here to assist us by reflecting back to us the ways in which we respond to the events of life. This doesn't mean that these friends are to sit in judgment around our actions, but by living fully on the path we support, are living there as well. When they falter, we are there to witness the faltering and sense the familiarity of their situation in our own life. That's all. That's why people gathered around the Buddha. In full acknowledgement that we are completely fools, and that we are completely fools waking up to our own wisdom. And that's the dedication and devotion. And that you do bad things, I do bad things, probably not big bad things, but that we're going to use them to wake up for our own good and for the good of everyone else. I'm trying to think what's a good question to come out of this. Just talk about refuge. The Racial and Social Justice Group, we're talking about refuge. We talked about refuge. Refuge is to fly home to. Refuge means to fly home to. What do you fly home to? What does being a fool mean to you? What does being wise mean? What does discernment of good and bad? How does refuge help you? Or anything else you want to talk about? Okay, so we got 3 and 3 here, and I'll